April 1944. The 7 crew of this Lancaster are on their last bombing run. If they survive tonight, they'll have flown 30 missions over war-torn Germany. Their tour of duty over.
They were probably 15 minutes into the return journey when they were attacked.
The Focke-Wulf opens up and does manage to hit it all around one side.
What happened next would write the crew of this bomber into the history books.
It's a massively brave undertaking with very little chance of success.
This is the story of one man's incredible feat of courage amid the most ferocious bombing campaign of World War II.
One word: terrifying. I mean, you've got to give the Germans credit. They knew how to defend. By God, they did.
In August of 1943, 7 young men come together at RAF Syerston. They will crew one of 106 Squadron's Lancaster bombers. Before them lie 30 combat missions over Germany. If they survive these, they will have completed their tour of duty. They know that together they will live, eat, and possibly die inside their bomber. Just married 24-year-old Norman Jackson is from West London. He is to be the flight engineer.
His son, David Jackson, remembers hearing his father talk about his new crewmates.
They were a complete band of brothers, all 7 of them. I think it was all for one, one for all, so to speak. Very, very close-knit crew.
The crew were led by 20-year-old pilot Fred Mifflin, raised in a fishing community in Newfoundland. Dick Starkey, another raw recruit, remembers Mifflin well.
We knew him as Miff. We joined the squadron, his crew of mine, about the same time, November 43. And you couldn't help but like him, he was such a nice fella.
Mifflin and his crew begin training for one of the most dangerous jobs in the British military. The RAF recruits thousands of young men to risk their lives flying over the heavily defended German cities. Men like Mifflin's rookie crew.
Jackson, Mifflin and the crew climb into their new Lancaster for their first training flight. It's a chance to prove hundreds of hours in the classroom have paid off.
The first few months, you went to what they called initial training wing.
Signing up at 17 and training as a flight engineer, Peter Butcher was another so-called bomber boy.
They used to take about 200 cadets on a course, and you'd do all your flying, and if you were good enough, you'd pass out, and you'd do it as a career in the Air Force.
Right, we're on track. Steady.
The training flight is uneventful, but at the last moment, ground control switches their runway, forcing Mifflin to land the massive bomber in a dangerous crosswind.
It is a dodgy thing to do because you've virtually got to hold one wing down into where the wind's coming from. It does make it difficult to land.
Because, I mean, it's such a big thing, that. You're asking for trouble.
Mifflin's approach is smooth until the last seconds. Roy Sandilands heard the story firsthand from his father, wireless operator Sandy Sandilands.
And they had strong side winds, strange airfield, put the plane down with an almighty bang.
He came in and landed it particularly heavily, and the undercarriage collapsed on the aeroplane.
Two engines came off, the fuselage caught fire, but fortunately all the crew managed to get out, and that was one of Miff's famous landings. So it was a great start to the team.
Mifflin's disastrous landing almost kills his crew before they fly a single bombing mission. The accident only bonds them closer together.
Lots of aircrews had accidents, particularly in training, and lots of people never even kind of made it to the end of their training. It's total war. I mean, lots of people are being killed all the time. You know, you just got to kind of shake yourself down and get on with it.
Any landing is a good landing. You're back on firm ground again.
Mifflin's young crew about to be sent into battle against squadrons of war-hardened German pilots defending their homeland to the last. Their trust in each other will be tested to the full in the months to come. By the end of 1943, the war against Nazi Germany is moving in the Allies' favor. They fly wave after wave of bombing missions to knock out the military might of Germany. Bomber Command has been ordered to shift tactics. British bombers are now to target cities as well as German industry. This is total war to break the will of the Nazis. It's what the Luftwaffe tried and failed to do to Britain 3 years earlier.
For the men that risk their lives in Allied bombers, the casualty rate is terrifying. Almost 1 in 2 will die before the end of the war. It's August the 4th, 1943. After their narrow escape from Mifflin's crash landing, the trainee Lancaster crew rallies behind their beleaguered pilot.
That was probably the incident then that made Bomber Command think maybe we should put this pilot back on retraining. But the crew didn't want it. They wanted to stay together and were quite happy to live with the heavy landings.
They thought the world of Mifflin. I mean, Mifflin's reputation apparently became fantastic through that entire squadron. Once Miff was airborne, he could handle a Lancaster bomber like nobody else.
A German Scarecrow bomb demolishes a Lancaster.
In reality, RAF top brass has no choice. Bomber Command needs new pilots.
They were very desperate to get pilots in those days, or any air crew. It didn't matter what it was, they wanted men urgently. Every man who flew in an airplane was a volunteer. There weren't any pressed men at all. It was a job to do, and I was determined to do it.
Training over, Mifflin, Jackson and the crew join 106 Squadron based at RAF Syerston. They're 7 amongst hundreds of new recruits. Eager young men like 18-year-old Dick Starkey.
1940, the Luftwaffe had raided Sheffield and bombed it. And they had killed quite a few people, naturally. And I thought, well, give them a bit of their own back, and if I could do that, I'll volunteer for the Air Force. So I did.
As soon as you hit the shoreline, you've been finding a lot of gunfire from the ground.
As they prepare to go into action, the new tactics of total war are drilled into Mifflin, Jackson and the crew.
We're going to fly straight through.
From the outset, Britain's wartime leaders are determined to use air power to take the war to the enemy. It had taken time to build up a bomber force capable of threatening the German war effort. Finally, in 1943, the bombers are ready. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris known as Bomber Harris, is a leading advocate of carpet bombing the German military and industrial infrastructure, much of it in German cities. The aim is to pound Nazi Germany into surrender. Civilians will die, but it is considered a price worth paying.
August the 22nd, 1943. 3 weeks after their training crash, the men's injuries have been patched up and they're ready for their first bombing run. If they make it to 30 missions without being shot down, their tour of duty will be over. Most crew don't expect to make it past 14. Their target tonight, the heavily defended industrial heartland of Germany, near Cologne. A devastating mix of high explosives is loaded into the belly of their Lancaster.
A typical bomb load was a light case 4,000-pound bomb. It had fuses all round it, and when it hit, it blew up. And when it blew up a lot. And you would have 500-pound bombs to go with it, and incendiaries, showers of incendiaries.
On this night, more than 400 bombers fly the same route across the North Sea into Germany.
As soon as we started our engines up, their radar recorded it. They knew we were coming, so the fighters were up there. I mean, Germans were no fools.
As they approach their target, German ground defences illuminate the sky like giant firecrackers.
If you were level with where the barrage burst, it was curtains, you'd go down, because it was big chunks of shrapnel, and it would go straight through an aeroplane, wings and everything, and all the petrol was in the wings.
Flak damages one of the Lancaster's wings, but pilot Fred Mifflin flies on. He wrestles with the controls to steady the plane while bomb aimer Maurice Toft zeroes in on their target, a chemical factory. Toft is guided by coloured flares dropped by RAF Pathfinder planes.
The Pathfinder force dropped markers, red, green, and what you saw was that marker.
To this day, fellow bomb aimer Harold Johnson from Mifflin and Jackson's squadron remembers it as the most harrowing moment of every mission.
Everything was coming up at you. You just kept your eye on your bomb sight, and you yelled out to everybody, "Bombs gone!"
Dropping bombs in 3, 2, 1. Bombs away!
You've got to fly straight and level for about 90 seconds while they take a photograph. And it's infrared, so when they get back to the squadron, the experts can tell exactly where you're bombed.
You were a sitting target then, absolutely a sitting target.
John Harrison is just 19 years old when he first straps himself in at the back of a Lancaster.
It was very lonely, I suppose. I mean, you went into the turret and shut the door, and apart from your intercom conversation with the rest of the crew, you didn't see anybody or anything. You felt very isolated. I wouldn't do it again. Oh my God, it was terrible. As you looked down, the place was absolutely burning. You could see all the fires and everything. Anyone who says he wasn't frightened over the target's a liar.
One word. Terrifying. I mean, you've got to give the Germans credit. They knew how to defend. By God, they did. Thank you, sir. He was looking after me again. Well, looking after us all, because we had no chance.
Bombs gone, Mifflin turns for home, still hours from safety. German night fighters lie in wait, picking off stragglers as they head back over the sea. Mifflin nurses the damaged Lancaster home. Seven young men safely back after their first mission. 29 to go. Back in their quarters, they face a stark reminder of the risks they run.
We were in tin huts, and there were 12 to a room. It was really a shaking thing to wake up in the morning and see the bed opposite not slept in, and the cupboards empty. As soon as a person was reported missing, they took all the possessions and sorted them, and what could be returned to wives and that sort of business was returned.
The Lancaster is a brilliantly difficult warfare. With a top speed of 282 miles per hour, it's fast. Its 102-foot wings carry 4 Merlin engines, though crucially, it can fly on only one. It also carries a massive payload of up to 22,000 pounds of high explosive. After all, it's designed for one thing and one thing only, and that's dropping bombs.
The Lancaster was a marvellous aircraft. If you were going a long way to Berlin, you carried 2,100 gallons of high-octane petrol and about 10 tons of bombs. You taxied out, so you straightened the tail wheel so you were facing straight down, and then open the throttles gradually, right to 74.5%. Then shove them forward with full power, 80, 90. And the tails come up then, but I've still not got the airspeed. And then at 110, you start lifting it off.
Crammed, dodging death mission after mission, the crew of this Lancaster forge a tight bond.
Miff and Sandy and Jacko, and they all had pet names, and they'd always find time for a drink, a beer if they were lucky, after any combats, and they keep as close as possible. They really would. They were fantastic.
Young boys, now veterans, they celebrate their 10th mission. Still another 20 to go.
Howdy, gentlemen.
November 1943. Arthur Bomber Harris identifies Berlin, Hitler's Nazi stronghold, as Bomber Command's primary target. It's the most heavily defended city in all of Europe. Flatten Berlin, and victory will be within reach.
My crew, we operated in what was called the Berlin season. And that Harris, the bomber in command chief, said that he was going to flatten Berlin.
Mifflin and Jackson's crew are one of thousands sent far into the Nazi heartland to bomb the capital. The very name, Berlin, is enough to send cold shivers down their spines. They know every mission might be their last.
There were several missions to Berlin, and none of them exactly looked forward to doing it because of the distance, the defence around Berlin, obviously. It was quite a dangerous raid to go on, as if there was anything other than a dangerous raid to go on.
December the 2nd, 1943, mission number 16. The night skies over Berlin are crowded with flak and Nazi fighters. 40 Lancasters are shot down before they reach their target. Mifflin and Jackson drop their deadly payload and turn for home.
They were attacked, and one of the engines were shot out.
Higgins! Higgins, can you hear me? I have no connection.
The Focke-Wulf 190 takes out the radio and intercom systems, as well as their engine. The crew cannot communicate with base or each other. Even worse, the rear and upper mid turrets are jammed. They can't rotate. They're defenseless against another attack.
The plane was in great difficulties.
Down to 3 engines, unable to defend themselves or call for help. Mifflin's crippled Lancaster is a sitting duck. For the 7 crew, the Berlin mission looks like their last. December 1943. Pilot Fred Mifflin's Lancaster has been shot up over Berlin. He and flight engineer Norman Jackson desperately struggle to get their stricken bomber back to base.
Where you're flying in a stream, but singly, you know, it's up to you how you get there and back.
One engine is damaged. Their radio shot up. They can't communicate with ground control. No one knows where they are or if they're still alive. All eyes are on Mifflin, the pilot with the reputation for heavy landings.
Moving tight.
My dad always used to say, it became a bit of a joke that they were wondering how they were going to land, because will it be a good one, will it be a bad one? But knowing, you know, what score would they give Miff out of 10? Would it be 1, 2, 3 or 4?
Great to see you, buddy. You too. Welcome back, boys.
When they were up there, they were in safe hands, and that was the main thing.
I'll get it fixed with you. Next up. Thank you, Jimmy. Certainly, my good man.
Mifflin and Jackson count themselves lucky, again. In 1943, more than 2,800 aircraft and tens of thousands of men are dead or lost in bombing raids over Germany. Still, Bomber Command top brass intensify the attacks on Berlin. They can make more Lancaster bombers, but men to fly them are thin on the ground.
They were doing their job. They were doing their duty. You know, they were given these missions to fly on every day or every night, and they went out and did that. And almost half of them, if not over half of them, gave their lives.
Mifflin, Jackson, and their comrades in 106 Squadron wonder if they'll ever get to the magical 30 missions when their tour of duty will be up.
We were daft, bloody low. Daft enough to do a job like that. You gotta be.
Some leave farewell letters before every mission.
Yeah, Miff got us out of a bit of a jam, so that was good. The fighter came up, the corkscrew works, so...
By February 1944, Mifflin, Jackson and their crew have already beaten the odds, flying 21 sorties. If they can survive 9 more, they'll be withdrawn from active service for a full 6 months.
We'd lie in our beds. The only thing is that nobody would say a word. We just lay there with our own thoughts. As you got experienced, you didn't used to think about not coming back, put it that way.
The problem with just flying guys is that flying combat operations is deeply, deeply stressful. Most people only have a certain amount of courage. It's not just losing your nerve, it's a combination of physical and mental exhaustion. It's incredibly tiring.
Crews learn at 11 o'clock each morning if they'll be flying that night.
About an hour before you went up to your flights, you used to have the operational meal, which was famous. Egg, bacon and sausage. Used to be called the famous last meal, which it was for some people.
March the 2nd, 1944. The crew gets an unexpected break. Captain Mifflin has been showing signs of acute stress and is ordered by RAF medics to take 10 days rest. The trigger is Mission 25, a hellish 8-hour sortie over Germany when 4 Lancasters are shot down with the loss of 28 lives.
You hardly got to know a crew. They used to go missing so quickly.
On the night of March the 30th, 1944, the RAF loses 95 bombers over Nuremberg. Despite the losses, night and day Allied bombers bring untold destruction to German cities. Firestorms sweep through the streets. The war is moving in the Allies' favor. The Nazi war machine is weakening. When Mifflin's crew return from leave, there'll be a new mission. Their target is the German aircraft industry. Their aim is to try to destroy their nemesis, the Luftwaffe, once and for all.
The bombing is relentless. Throughout Germany, thousands of civilians are killed. Those that can flee in terror from the fire and devastation. Nazi propaganda, and later some in Britain, accuse Bomber Command of war crimes.
I read in papers where we were called murderers. What a terrible thing to say to a bloke who sticks his neck out. If the people are there under the bombs, there's nothing we can do. We're told to drop them, and we did.
Despite the controversy, the strategy yields results. The Nazi war machine and German morale is weakening.
Their job was to defeat Germany as quickly as possible with as few losses of life to Allied subjects as possible. And they did that. And if that meant cowing Nazi Germany into surrendering by bombing and area bombing their cities and their population, that was a price they were prepared to pay.
April the 25th, 1944. Mifflin and Jackson's crew make it to 29 missions. They've survived night fighters, flak, and a crash landing. One more bombing run over Germany, and they've beaten the odds. One more mission, and their tour is over.
Tonight, the crew toasts Norman Jackson. He's already completed his 30th sortie. With his wife hours from expecting their first baby, he has permission to go home. Jackson has other ideas.
He's perfectly within his rights to say, I'm off, boys, I've done my 30.
They were so close to one another. He said, I should go. He said, I'm not going to let them down now. And he didn't.
They'd flown 29 missions together. They obviously lived together. They had fun together, and they wanted to go out together. My father went along on this mission not because he had to, but because he wanted to see the rest of the crew through.
That's...
The following evening, at the briefing, they're given their target.
2100 hours.
A factory deep in the heart of industrial Germany.
Those big targets deep into Germany were the ones that no one really wanted to go on. So when they go to their briefing and, the briefing officer comes up and points on the map and says, tonight the target is Schweinfurt, there is a collective groan that this is where they're going to be heading.
They were quite superstitious about going to Schweinfurt, all of them. The 2 previous Schweinfurt flights had been cancelled at the last minute, but this night it was definitely on.
Prior to takeoff on that mission, my father received a telegram with a little note saying, "Be careful."
Jacko got a telegram from his wife saying that he was the proud father of a newborn baby boy.
Rather than go home to see his baby, Jackson climbs into their Lancaster for the crew's last mission.
And if he'd said to the CO, look, I've done my 30 trips, I don't want to go tonight, I'm pushing my luck, I would have been the next man to go.
The crew themselves were looking forward to return because they were going to wet the baby's head, so to speak, and have a drink afterwards.
At 21:30 hours, with Mifflin and Jackson in the cockpit, their Lancaster lurches into the sky with a belly full of bombs. Along with a wall of 226 other bombers, they head across the coast towards Germany.
The flight into Germany is uneventful. No night fighters or flak. The sky's eerily silent.
We seem to experience approximately 20 knots of headwind.
Now, when they did arrive at that target, it turned out they were the last ones there. They arrived 10 minutes after the rest of the formation.
Mifflin holds the Lancaster steady as bomb aimer Maurice Toft waits for the right moment.
2, 1. Bombs away.
Bombs dropped, pictures taken, Mifflin turns home for the last time. Still no searchlights, no flak, no other bombers. Just hours from completing the mission, they think they're alone in the night sky. They're not.
We have an enemy plane on the fifth post. Cover your eyes quite closely.
Rear gunner Johnny Johnson lets off a burst from his guns, but misses. German cannon shells rip into the rear turret, seriously wounding Johnson. Bullets rake up the Lancaster's side, hitting Norman Jackson in the legs.
Jackson! Johnson! You okay? All right? Johnson, are you all right? Johnson's been hit! Where's on the way on the flank?
If you come under attack, you haven't got much time, so they've got to act super quick.
You all right? Yeah. Bloody hell, the engine's off the way!
The fuel tanks had been punctured and fuel was leaking out, and it was the exhaust from the engine, the heat from that was igniting the fuel.
With thousands of gallons of fuel still in the wings, the Lancaster could explode any minute.
And to my father at that moment, it was quite clear what needed to be done, and that he was the man to do it. It was his job. He was the flight engineer. There was nobody else's on that aeroplane, it was his.
Norman Jackson tells the crew his outlandish plan. He wants them to feed him out of the plane using parachute lines. He'll work his way across the wing to the engine, then put out the flames with the fire extinguisher.
He said, I know it's not going to work, but my reasoning behind this is I may be able to put her out. If I do, you may be able to drag me back in. And if I don't, and I get blown over the wing, then just feed the parachute out as best you can. Mifflin couldn't believe it. They absolutely could not believe that somebody wanted to climb out onto a flaming Lancaster bomber on fire at 18,000 feet.
Toft, Higgins and Sandilands hold the parachute cords as Jackson makes his move for the wing.
Having released the hatch behind the pilot's seat, he climbed onto the table, got his head out.
They twisted the guide ropes on the parachute and they used it as a rope, and they just fed him out to it.
Mifflin reduces speed to 140 miles an hour. The freezing slipstream sucks Jackson's breath away.
It's a massively brave undertaking with very little chance of success, but in Jackson's mind is try something really crazy like this or the whole thing blows. So it's very much a kind of lesser of two evils, so he just goes for it. And he gets out onto the fuselage, the two guys holding onto him, just inching it out the parachute.
Mifflin wrestles with the unwieldy Lancaster.
My father removed the fire extinguisher from his jacket. He started dealing with the fire.
Unbelievably, the flames on the wing die down.
He never thought past putting the flames out. I don't think he ever considered getting back. But that was my father. He was a very practical man. He would just do whatever needed to be done.
Suddenly, tracers light up the night sky.
At that moment, the Focke-Wulf comes by and does another run.
Jackson is riddled by the night fighter's bullets. He loses grip, sucked away by the slipstream.
Still attached to the aeroplane by his parachute. The crew were trying to get his parachute out.
Feeling the parachute cord snap tight, the three men in the Lancaster are certain their friend is dead. They let go.
So the parachute is left out, but it catches on fire.
Hit twice by the night fighter, the giant Lancaster spirals out of control and plummets towards Earth.
Desperate to save his crew, pilot Fred Mifflin struggles to control his stricken Lancaster. Meanwhile, Norman Jackson is tumbling to Earth, his parachute in flames.
With his Lancaster on fire and going down fast, pilot Fred Mifflin orders the rest of the crew to bail out. Mifflin himself stays at the controls, desperately trying to steady the plane. 4 of the crew throw themselves into the night sky.
Toft, Sandilands, Higgins and Smith all manage to get out. They all land safely without further mishap. And inevitably they get picked up.
The 4 men are patched up at a German hospital. There, they make an astounding discovery.
Higgins! They saw some RAF uniform on this person on the trolley, and I went over to him and realized it was my father and couldn't believe that he was still alive.
Incredibly, after being shot off the Lancaster's wing, Jackson's burning parachute held just long enough for him to tumble to Earth.
Jackson's now lying on the ground with his 2 broken ankles, with his leg shot up, with his shoulder wound, with his arm wound. His hands are badly burned. I mean, this is a guy who's in an extremely bad shape.
During this time, my father was never unconscious. He was conscious the whole time.
Badly burnt, unable to walk, Jackson inches along the ground looking for help.
He crawled on his elbows and his knees because his hands were so badly burnt. One eye was completely closed through the swelling on his face. And he came across a village.
It wasn't uncommon at all for downed airmen to be lynched by Germans when they got down. And in many ways, it's remarkable that more weren't because, you know, after all, these were the guys that were delivering untold destruction on Germany.
At the hospital, he was heavily bandaged on his hands and around his face and put onto a trolley.
Skipper Fred Mifflin and rear gunner Hugh Johnson aren't so lucky. Tragically, their bodies are found in the charred wreckage of the Lancaster bomber.
They knew he was going down. They knew that he'd just never, ever be able to leave the controls, so he couldn't physically get out of the plane. So he sacrificed his young life for the sake of his pals and his crew members.
The 5 survivors are sent to sit out the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp. Finally liberated in May 1945, Norman Jackson returns home and meets the son born on the fateful night of his last mission. Gradually, the incredible story of Norman Jackson's selfless bravery leaks out, and he's fated as a hero. At home, convalescing with his wife and new baby, he gets a call. He's been awarded the Victoria Cross.
And my father's answer was, "What the bloody hell for?" And they told him, and he said, "Absolute nonsense." He felt that he didn't do anything that anybody else would have not done.
A modest man, Jackson preferred life out of the public gaze, and he and his wife Alma had 6 more children, including David. Norman Jackson died on the 26th of March 1994, aged 74, 1 month before the anniversary of the fateful mission to Schweinfurt. Jackson's Victoria Cross was one of 23 awarded to Bomber Command during World War II. Over 12,000 RAF aircraft were lost during the war, and out of 125,000 men in Bomber Command, over 55,000 lost their lives. It is an extraordinary example of an act of collective bravery. On June the 28th, 2012, almost 70 years after the end of the Second World War, the forgotten men of Bomber Command were officially recognized with a major public memorial in London's Green Park. A memorial dedicated to those that served and survived like Norman Jackson, and those that lost their lives like Fred Mifflin.